know it's been a long day, so I'm going to say snappy, controversial, provocative things. Just to quickly get back to the riding a bike question. I'm not going to have time to talk about this, but I will say that I've written about it. We even had an article in the Times. This distinction between the motor and the cognitive is going to turn out, in my view, to be largely false. To get to what was said by David, he's absolutely correct about what may be the reason for this, how difficult it is to ride a bike. It's also very similar to going back to a country where you haven't spoken French, for example, and then you start to practice and it comes back in chunks. And there is something called, you can look this up, called free lunch learning. And as David was intuiting, unless he knew about free lunch learning, was that it's true that networks, neural networks, can have this property of associative learning where you actually, inherent to the architecture of these networks, will get back learning for free when you learn a piece. So in other words, you learn what table is again in German, and chair comes back for free, for example. And it's absolutely not true that somebody who hasn't ridden a bike, when they do it again after years, isn't a bit shaky and a bit off. It's just that they retrieve fast, which is similar to vocabulary. So it's called free lunch learning, and you can look it up. And the second point is this distinction between the motor and the cognitive is mainly a cultural bias rather than actually something that neuroscience supports. The cerebellum has unique properties, but it's only one piece of motor learning, and you wouldn't be able to learn how to ride a bike if you only had a cerebellum. Okay. Getting back to, we're going to talk about stroke, like Amy. Just to put stroke into perspective, and if you guys want controversial things to write about, start writing now, because stroke is, in fact, far and away the most devastating neurological illness. I think Jeff Rothstein mentioned that 1 in 500 people will die of ALS in the US, 1 in 18 will die of stroke in the US. 1 in 6 women over the age of 65 will have a stroke. 1 in 5 men over the age of 65 will have a stroke. About 800,000 people a year have strokes. There's somebody having a stroke in this country every 40 seconds. There's somebody dying of a stroke every 4 minutes. Okay, so it blows the other diseases out of the water in terms of its impact. And I'm saying that not to have a competition, but because stroke is woefully underfunded. And what Amy was talking about and what she's doing and what other people are doing in rehab, it's time for a revolution in rehab, because those of you who do go on to have strokes, and I'm afraid it doesn't look good with a number in here, you're going to be somewhat shocked by how medieval rehabilitation is and how desperately in need of new treatments we are, like the treadmill treatment that Amy showed you. And just so you don't think it's a disease of old people, in 2009, 34% of the strokes that were hospitalized were under the age of 60. Okay? So it's not a disease of old people unless you want to come up with a new definition in our immature age of old. This is our website, and you can go to get the papers I'm going to be talking about from there. The only reason I show this is because I want you to follow us on Twitter. We're having a competition with other labs, and we're desperately behind. Follow us. All right. So recovery, I think this is very important. It can mean two things. One is we want, and this is what I'm going to talk about mostly today, is we'd like to have people return to doing things the way they were doing them before, or you can compensate. Now, in the motor domain, compensation and true recovery are usually meant in the behavioral realm. What RG was showing was the sort of interesting possibility that it's more difficult in the language domain to distinguish neural compensation from neural recovery. And it's probably because there's degeneracy and redundancy in how we construct language that is more complex than movements, at least in terms of how we can measure it. So what I'm going to be talking about here is not neural or compensation versus recovery. I'm going to talk about, does the behavior look phenotypically the same as before or close to it, or are you just finding a new way to do it? For example, you're right-handed, you have a stroke, and you learn how to use your left arm instead. So, I'm going to be talking to you, again, another talking point about mouse experiments and human experiments, and I think Jeff brought this up. The idea that you do fundamental science in animals and then you just apply it in humans has always been nonsense, but it's particularly nonsense now. And the only way that we're going to move forward is by having two-way traffic between people working in non-human animals and in animals. As Amy showed in that really good slide at the beginning, the tools that you use to do science in humans are different from the tools that you use to some degree in animals. But the way of thinking, the rigor, the concepts overlap tremendously. And in fact, the experiments I'm going to show you today, done under my supervision by an assistant professor, the mouse experiments, I designed them with him from our human results. Okay, so in other words, what you're going to see happening is two-way traffic and people working on non-human systems and human systems together, rather than this totally passé distinction between clinical and basic research. This is just to justify why we're allowed to look at the rodent and the human, just in terms of this. I'm sorry, it's not the greatest slide, but it's amazing how much dexterous prehension rodents have. I mean, those of you who've lived in New York as long as I did will see just how remarkable rats are when you walk into the house unexpectedly, they're on your computer. Right? All right, so mouse. So take-home point here is that if you have a stroke in the United States in 2014, you're better off if you're a rodent than if you're a human being. Okay, and I'm being serious. If you give strokes to rodents, you then put them in these really fun environments where they have friends to play with, they have wheels to run on, it's an enriched environment, they do really well. And it's a very interesting thing, and it's a distinction that's very important to have between the notion of motor learning and training, which has been, in my view, overemphasized for rehabilitation. And the reason for that is because learning is the way to compensate, versus repair and plasticity. They're not synonyms, repair and learning, where there are these endogenous processes that can actually get you back your true behavior. And is it possible that having enjoyment and being allowed to do whatever you want may be better for repair, at least early on, versus picking a particular task and pounding people at it? Okay? And what we know, and this is what's very interesting, is in the rodent literature, it seems as though for a brief period after a stroke, you recapitulate the superplasticity you had during development. So you have a little recapitulation of developmental plasticity for a period after a stroke. Okay, it's very interesting. And there are overlapping growth factors, genes expressed, levels of inhibition and excitation that seem to recapitulate ontogeny. Okay, and people have talked about this. Does ischemia give you a brief recapitulation of ontogeny? Okay, so you get a switch on, and then unfortunately you get a switch off. And during this period between the switch on and switch off, for example, of growth factors, you seem to be particularly responsive to training effects. And we need to exploit that in human beings. Okay? At the moment, people spend 60% of their time alone in hospital rooms after stroke. They make homeopathic amounts of movements, which we know don't induce cortical plasticity. And so, unfortunately, despite what the science is showing in rodents, at the current time, again, get your pens out, that's not being translated to the human world. Rehabilitation in the United States is driven entirely by economics, not by science. This is Steve Zeiler. He has a K award. These are the experiments I'm going to show you. This is just to show you a mouse. Look at his little digits, how cute that is. That's the first time it's ever done it. But you can see, I bet you're surprised that they have that degree of dexterity, okay? Now, the way that Steve set this up was so that they can't grab with their mouth. You know, rodents don't really look at things, they're olfactory, and they would rather nuzzle up against things. So we have to prevent them by giving them a slit and things like that. Okay, this is early on, and basically this is the behavior that you can train them on. The reason we're using this behavior is because it's more analogous to human prehension. People don't usually eat with their mouths. I mean, grab things with their mouths. And this is what we're going to show you. So we can give a mouse a stroke. This is just a cross-section, a little bit like the images that Arji showed you, but this is histological. And you know, this is the two sides. And you can give them a stroke in the equivalent of motor cortex. It doesn't do the full thickness of cortex. You can train the mouse before the stroke on the task I just showed you. You then give it a stroke like I just showed you. And there's a plummeting in its behavior. And you basically, in this week, you just put it in its cage alone. If you then start to rehabilitate it, no matter how long you train it, you can never get it back to the pre-stroke level. This is to show that it's not just forgetting, because if you take a mouse and you just don't give it a stroke, you train it, and then you just have it not train on that task for a week, and then you have it come back, it remembers what it had. So it's not as though this is just a forgetting phenomenon. However, if you give it a stroke and then you wait 24 hours and then you start retraining it, you get right back to where it was before. So in other words, in the mouse, it's quite dramatic that if you don't dilly-dally and you start the rehabilitation early, then you can actually get quite a dramatic restoration of behavior, which is already on the way if you wait a week. So this window of opportunity, this brief recapitulation of ontogeny, is already decaying after a week in the mouse. So rehabilitation really is taking this sensitive period and not wanting to sort of start training early to get you up rather than waiting and doing that. And what I'm saying is human rehabilitation is a combination of delay and too low a dose of the treatment, even if you were to go early. All right? So it's dose times time. Okay, so enough about the mouse. Let's quickly go on to the human. And this is a study that has been going on now for the last 3 years, and it's going to start a trial component this summer involving Columbia, Hopkins, and Zurich. It's a very large team. I'll show you some of the players. Just like everyone else has said, this cannot be done without a lot of wonderful people. What I'm going to show you here is the Columbia wing data of this study. And just to show you that there are analogs to what I just showed you in the mouse in the human. Okay? So instead of making people reach through slits for pellets, you can make people make movements on what looks like a hockey air sled. There are reasons for this task. It's a task which, if you constrain the trunk and you have the elbow and shoulder at the same level, you can't compensate. So in other words, the only way you can do it the way we want you to do it is if you get your motor control back, not, for example, by moving your trunk or finding some other way to do it. Okay? So it's sort of a compensation-proof test of motor control. And if all of you would have a go at it, so in other words, you just have targets that lie around like a clock, you just sit there with your elbow and shoulder at the same level, it's on an air sled, so there's no friction, and you make these movements to the targets, and you would all look like this, okay? This is what a patient with a mild to moderate stroke looks like. This is what a patient with a severe stroke looks like, okay? In other words, they can't compensate to look good through some other way because we make it impossible, so their motor control deficit is revealed. Now, you can take those trajectories, and I'm not going to go into detail, but you can do something called hierarchical PCA to actually quantify those trajectories, and you can divide them into a mean and a variance. And what this study shows, unfortunately, rather like the mouse data, is that control, not compensation, improvement is over by 4 weeks in humans. Okay, so this plasticity that is there is used up at 4 to 5 weeks in humans. Right? So you have this critical window that I'm arguing is frishered away by current forms of rehabilitation. It's interestingly, I won't show you the data today. For the hand, it seems like we have more time to play with. But for the arm, it's depressing, actually. So we've got to do something dramatic. And it's not a flaw effect because these are controls. The technique has all the sensitivity it needs to detect improvement from this, and it's not happening. Why is this happening at all? What is that improvement that's going on in the first 4 weeks? Well, I would argue, and we have argued, that it's not related to rehabilitation itself. It's an endogenous process that we need to find a way to jump on top of, but we're not. And I don't have time to go through this, but we've devised a statistical rule to show that this recovery is fairly predictable based on your initial level of impairment. And there's also a neural network similar in derivation from what Arji was showing, where you can actually show the neural correlates of the subsequent improvement of this statistical rule that goes on and then stops after 4 to 5 weeks, regardless of what we do. So what's the model? In a healthy subject, you've got a normal brain and you have normal levels of plasticity. In a chronic case, you've got a damaged brain and your learning mechanisms are no different to what a healthy subject has, unless your lesion just happens to be in a critical place, but that's not the issue when it comes to hemiparesis. And then there's this special case of hyperplasticity and brain damage that we're not sure how long it lasts, but at least for the arm, it's closing more quickly than we were hoping. So what to do? Well, we need to take this sensitive period and we need to prolong it, enhance it. We need to then exploit it. In other words, even if there is a window, we have to do something in that window, right? It's a little, what do we do? And one thing that a lot of people do is task-specific training. Another one is to give them an enriched environment. So what's the equivalent of making it fun and colorful and non-boring? All right. So as RG mentioned, fluoxetine is all the rage. And I don't have time, and that's my way of saying it's because I don't know exactly what fluoxetine is doing. There are people in this room far better qualified than I am to say, but people have seen changes in LGP, increased expressions of BDNF. It certainly does seem as though there are effects of fluoxetine and other SSRIs that are not related to its serotonergic effect, okay? And the important thing, this was a paper, important paper showing that it was restoring plasticity in visual cortex, and then there was this trial that was done showing improvement in patients if it was given for them for the first 3 months. And interestingly, the average time of onset of giving the 20 milligrams of Prozac in this trial was 9 days. So going back to the mouse, so this is what I'm talking about. This is this dance, right, between the mouse and the human. Flame was done, let's have a look in the mouse. Steve then basically did what I said before. You train 2 groups of mice on this reaching task. You then start fluoxetine within a day of their stroke. They plummet, and then you start training them, and really, very pleasingly, in the animals that get the fluoxetine, you can actually get them back to normal levels, having delayed a week, which was not the case before, all right? So in other words, perhaps we can, in fact, extend or preserve this heightened plasticity for longer, which would be good because sometimes patients are very ill and they can't start doing intense treatment as quickly as we'd like. And this is the result of the FLAME study, also showing a sort of improvement, piggybacking on the spontaneous recovery I'm talking about in the humans who got fluoxetine. So what about after the window? I just want to get to chronic because I want you to understand that we've got to do something early because there's a certain futility in what once you go late in the motor system. So this is work, again, before I moved from Columbia to Hopkins, and I'm just going to quickly tell you the punchlines. We did 2 studies. The 2 most exciting forms of rehabilitation that you probably heard about are robotics and constraint-induced therapy. Constraint-induced therapy is when you sort of put the healthy arm in a sling or in a mitten, so you're forced to use your unaffected side, okay? Punchline, in the robotics study, we found feeble improvements in motor control in response to the robotic therapy for 3 weeks, 2 weeks. Okay, so in other words, unlike the spontaneous recovery that's quite dramatic early, which isn't due to us, if you try and force it yourself after the window is closed, you get no mileage. Similarly, no improvement at all in motor control after constraint-induced therapy. So the 2 most, advertised and talked about forms of therapy when it comes to motor control can't do what your brain is doing on its own early. You can compensate. I'm not dissing physical therapists, occupational therapists, but what they're doing is teaching you this. They're teaching you, if instead of doing the high jump like this, you do it like this. This is a change in strategy. This is the Fosbury flop that changed the world record in the high jump. Doing the same task in a totally different way with what you have left is perfectly valid, but it's not repairing the brain, okay? So what to do? Well, enough criticism. Can we actually do something? So SMARTS 2, which is funded, again by the group that did the natural history, and this is some of the Hopkins people that I'm going to talk about, is a trial that we're hoping to do. So if you want to, again, write about something exciting, I'll be happy for you to advertise it. We're trying to do something brand new, which is to take this window, exploit it with a combination of robotics and video gaming. So this is the co-investigator at Hopkins, Pablo Selnick, the fellow and the research assistant who will be doing it. And this is the gaming team in my lab who have created something which I'll show you in a minute. And what we're trying to do is enrich. Okay, so this is a standard environment. This is the resident artist in my lab, Kat. I'll just show you her. Kat. It's good to have, again, humanities, very important, right? You need artists in labs. I'm serious, right? I don't think there's another lab at Hopkins that has a full-time artist in it. It's terrible, it's sad. All right. Standard environment, alone most of the time watching dreadful reality TV programs. this is what you want. You want a robot in the room. You want to be immersed in virtual reality. And you may want to have your brain stimulated, which is what Pablo Selnick, when he designed the study with me, he's an expert on brain stimulation, will be doing this, plus imagine a battery stuck on your head. All right? Here's the robot, right? And this is the study. And I'll finish by just showing you what the patients have already started playing with. Can we turn the lights down a minute just to see this? Is it possible, or do I have control over that? Why isn't this? Oops, I'm sorry. So this is a person actually controlling, you're the dolphin, okay? And you basically don't get given any task instructions, all right? Other than eat as many fish as you can. And then when you get fish fuel, you can then do jumps that are better and better. This is with the robot attached, okay? So the idea here, and this is being done with 3D sound. We are thinking of doing it 3D, and the patients that have done this thus far don't want to get out of it. They want to stay in the ocean with this bizarre feeling of immersion, and they don't realize it, but we've set it up so that the dolphin is moving in the places we want you to go, and you're just basically enriched. And the beautiful thing about this is that you can play this with a loved one, so you can both dive in to the ocean and do this. And in the ocean, you're equals, right, because we can play with the parameters. Right? So we have to change the clinical, dreary, depressing environment, and we have to give what the rats have, and this is the way we're doing it, and we're going to try and do this in the window where the plasticity is still on our side. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.